Hello, I'm Phil and welcome to Who's He at the Movies, and this time I'm going to take a look at 2012's Dredd. A few months ago I covered Sylvester Stallone's attempt at portraying Megacity 1's finest, and I felt it came up somewhat short. So as a palate cleanser, I thought this time I would rewatch Dredd, starring Karl Urban, Lena Headey and Olivia Thirlby. But first, let's go back in time. When it was announced in 2008 that another attempt would be made to bring Judge Dredd to the big screen, once again, and maybe foolishly, I was excited. Now, dribs and drabs of information was steadily finding its way on the internet, and I was eagerly trying to find out anything that I could on the progress of the film, which began filming in 2010 in Johannesburg and Cape Town. I knew nothing about writer Alex Garland or director Pete Travis, but from the off, it certainly appeared they were not going to make the same mistakes as 1995's Judge Dredd. From the outset, they stated that this would be more rooted in the comic books and had planned this as a trilogy, eventually culminating with the introduction of Judge Death and the Dark Judges. There was also only going to be one antagonist, Mar Madrigal. There was no stuffing as many characters into a single film as in the previous film, which from my point of view, well, it was a very, very good thing. But the main thing for me was the casting of Karl Urban as Judge Dredd. At the time, I only ever really knew him as Éomer from the Lord of the Rings films, but after reading interviews with him, it became apparent, well, he got the character of Judge Dredd. He understood what it was all about, and the one thing he stated before anyone had seen a single frame of film was that the helmet stayed on. Now, for fans, this was important. Fans hated the fact that Stallone spent the majority of his film with the helmet off, so for Karl Urban to say he would be keeping the helmet on gave fans, well, just a little bit of confidence. Now, for some of you, this may sound a little bit ridiculous. Why is an actor not showing his face such a big deal? Well, the fact is, for fans, Dredd's unseen face is just as iconic as Wolverine's adamantium claws or the S on Superman's chest. It's funny how people obsess over details such as this, but if you're going to bring comic book characters or any other famous literary characters to life for that matter, and it can be made to work on the big screen, well, just do it properly. I think that's what all people are asking and saying. But before I go any further, and as a little aside, after the film was released, one evening, 2000 AD handed over their Twitter account to Karl Urban for him to answer questions from fans. I sent him a message asking him what other aspects of the Dredd character would he like to explore in a sequel, not expecting to get a reply. However, reply he did, and he said that if a sequel went ahead and he would like to explore the big lie. It was this point I knew this wasn't just another actor taking a job. He really did know his stuff. And, well, if you want to know what the big lie is and what this means for the character of Dredd, well, the internet is your friend. So, as the release date for the film approached, images started to appear on the internet, with the first being Karl Urban in this film's interpretation of the judge's uniform. And lo and behold, the fanboys started whining. Wow, his helmet's too big! Wow, his uniform is nothing like the comics! Well, as it turned out, his helmet wasn't too big, and the uniform was changed for a reason, as was evident when I first saw the film. But the one thing that did make my heart sink a little bit was the fact it was going to be filmed in 3D, which in 2012 was very much in vogue with filmmakers and Hollywood in general, really. However, I decided that I would go and see a 2D print, as I saw and still see 3D as a pointless fad. Sure, it looks nice, but as a viewing experience, I just find it completely headache-inducing. So, one hot sunny afternoon, I dragged my wife along to see the film. But unfortunately, not a 2D print. In fact, I found it very hard to find any cinema that was going to have it shown in 2D. So, while I left the cinema that afternoon and having thoroughly enjoyed the film and washing away the aftertaste of the Stallone version, I realised very quickly that the film just may well be in trouble. And that's I had a feeling at the time that no one was going to see this film. Now, admittedly, I saw the film on a weekday afternoon, but there was only 3 of us in the cinema. I'll repeat that, 3. But before I get into the aftermath, what about the film itself? Well, as I said, I enjoyed and I still enjoy it. The film itself is less fantastical than the Stallone version and takes itself very seriously. In fact, maybe a bit too seriously. It's relentlessly grim and does highlight that life in the megacity is anything but fun. Ordinary people are caught in between the judges and the criminal gangs, with the main gang in this film being the Marmar clan, headed up by Marmar Madrigal, played by Lena Headey. And rather than chewing the scenery like Amanda Santia's Rico Dredd, Lena Headey plays Marmar somewhat detached from what she's actually doing. In fact, she really underplays the character, which is quite different and, to be honest, which I found to be a little bit unsettling. But what about the plot? Well, I suppose you could describe it as the day in the life of a rookie judge, which in this case is Cassandra Anderson, played by Olivia Thirlby. And as per the comic book, she has telepathic abilities, but this is not the wisecracking Anderson that fans are used to. This is a wet behind the ears Anderson who hesitates in her first engagement with a gang and appears to be appalled by the violence she's expected to mete out. But as this world is nothing but violence, her character is eventually sucked into that violent cycle come the end of the movie. But of course, how does Karl Urban stack up as Dredd? Well, after reading all his quotes about getting the character right this time, he does, and he does it extremely well. He gets the Dredd grimace down to a T, and his every utterance is barely contained anger, with him quietly growling out sentences. And his saying of Dredd's famous phrase, "I'm the law," is far superior to Stallone's shouty staccato delivery. In fact, when I think of Dredd, the first person I now think of is Karl Urban. He left a lasting impression in the role, and he plays him as a very matter of fact, almost like a robot who's been programmed to deliver justice. And this is what the comic book Dredd is like. So I say to Karl Urban, well done, mate. Now earlier, I mentioned that they changed the design of the uniform for this movie. While the judge's helmet is identical to the comic book, gone was the massive golden eagle, shoulder armour and spandex from the previous film, and replaced with more practical body armour and motorcycle leathers. Now, while I was initially sceptical of this new look, it is now my favourite iteration. This version of Dredd's world is more down to earth, so the uniform had to be practical and show that being a judge required something that would protect them more in the line of duty. The design also made sense from a budget perspective. It was cheaper, but the practical design also allowed the actors to move more freely, which might just go a long way to explaining why Stallone spent so much of his film out of the judge's uniform. And nothing in this world is shiny. Everything is dirty and worn, which adds to the realism this film was aiming for. Now, as I first saw the film in 3D, I have to admit it does actually work. The effects have shown what happens when someone takes the drug slow-mo, which the Marmar clan is the main manufacturer of in this film, looks amazing with its enhanced lights and colours. But to be honest, those effects do look just as good in 2D, so it does make the 3D effects somewhat redundant in my mind. So I stick by my 3D is a fad attitude. Other standout scenes include Marmar's gang shooting up a building with some very big guns, and Dredd's solution to Marmar's ultimatum at the end of the film is fairly low key, which is unusual for a film of its type. But while I really enjoy this movie, it tanked at the box office. While for me it's the superior of the Judge Dredd movies, Dredd just took over $41 million at the box office on a budget of $30 to $45 million. While derided, the Stallone version actually made more money, so 2012's Dredd was considered a flop. So why did this happen? How did a film that was closer in tone to the comic book and was made by a production team and a lead actor who finally understood the character of Dredd fail? Well folks, it's my old enemy, 3D. The prints that were distributed to cinemas were all mainly 3D, with hardly any 2D prints being released. This severely hampered any chance of reaching a wider audience, as not everyone wants to watch a film in 3D. But the other major contributor to the film's failure was marketing. Absolutely no one knew this film was being released, and even Karl Urban himself stated after the film came out that the film had zero audience awareness. Nobody knew the movie was being released. Dredd represents a failure in marketing, not filmmaking. It was also unfairly compared to another film, The Raid Redemption, which came out just before Dredd and basically has the same plot, with the heroes of the piece making their way up floor by floor of a tower block until they finally meet the villain at the top. However, while The Raid was released before Dredd, Dredd actually went into production first, so accusations of plagiarism which were floating around at the time were and are unfair. Critically, the film was also very well received, with Urban's and Thirlby's performances being singled out for praise. But unfortunately, despite this, audiences still stayed away. Now, while I definitely feel that this film deserved more success than it did, and I really enjoy watching it, Unfortunately, it is in no way a perfect film. The Judge Dredd comic strip had always been satirical, and unfortunately, just like the Stallone version, this film is also missing that satirical edge. It's also lacking in the dark humour that the comic strip relishes. In fact, there is hardly any form of humour in this film whatsoever, which was needed to undercut the grim and violent tone of the film. Also, while I like the more realistic take on the future, perhaps it needs to embrace the comic book world just a little bit more. The judges' uniforms and their weapons and vehicles are all on point. But Mega City 1 unfortunately looks just like Cape Town and Johannesburg with a few mega blocks digitally inserted. It needs to look more like a different future rather than an alternate present. It also came out in the wash afterwards that director Pete Travis allegedly didn't direct a lot of the film, and that writer Alex Garland stepped in to direct most of the movie. Now, who knows if this affected the original vision of the film or not, but rumours like this don't really help a film, especially something as beloved as this. But while this film flopped at the cinema, it did have a second life on DVD where sales were very, very good. This gave some of us hope that a sequel would be greenlit, and Karl Urban was, and as I understand it, is still very much up for reprising the role. But unfortunately, DVD sales do not affect big screen movies being greenlit, and any other further films are unfortunately shelved. However, a small sliver of light was seen when it was announced that a TV series, Judge Dredd Mega City 1, will be made starring Karl Urban with either Netflix or Amazon Prime set to stream it. However, that was back in 2017, and unfortunately again, nothing has been heard since. All in all, I think Judge Dredd is an extremely difficult character to get right on film. Neither of the films fully get the world of Mega City 1 right. The first one got the look of a mega city looking like the comic books, but failed with a messy plot, a lead actor who didn't understand the character, and that old chestnut studio interference. The 2012 Dredd film got Dredd and the judges spot on, but the look and feel of Mega City 1 was, for me, well, just a bit off. But had the marketing been better and more 2D prints were distributed to the cinemas, I'm of the opinion that this film would have done much, much better, as all those people who didn't want to watch it in 3D at the cinema, well, they just waited for it to come out on DVD and watch it in 2D at home. But I think the one thing that holds back a really successful Dredd film is audience awareness. While Marvel and DC comic book characters are known the world over, is Judge Dredd that well known outside of the UK? While it is set in the USA of the future, Dredd is very much a British comic book character, with a very British satirical take on the US style of policing, which in this world is a fascist police state. And without trying to sound elitist, I don't think many audiences outside the UK gets the joke. Dredd is an anti-hero, not an action hero. He's a fascist. You're not really supposed to root for him, and perhaps that's a tough sell. But all in all, if this film had got a sequel, and it does deserve one, I think it would have opened up the world and the character of Dredd even more. While the film is lacking in character development, except, well, maybe for Judge Anderson, I thought it was a solid film that was a good jumping off point into the world of Dredd, and had things been different, perhaps we would have seen Dredd question his actions in The Big Lion, facing the dark judges. I would pay good money to see that.